Before I get into that important meeting, it's necessary to give you some background on how I reached such a pivotal moment. My childhood in New York was anything but normal. My family was deeply involved in a business where loyalty and silence were everything. My father and uncle, both respected in their fields, started grooming me early on. By 17, I was already part of their world, learning the ropes of both the legitimate construction trade and the darker aspects of our family's business. I began as a laborer in construction during the summers, but soon got more involved in the family's other dealings. By my early 20s, I had done my first collection job and understood what loyalty meant. I earned my place not just because of my name, but through my actions. However, this life also led to a troubled marriage with a woman who couldn't handle the world I was tied to. That marriage eventually fell apart, opening the door to a life-changing encounter. I found myself in a small Italian restaurant in Italy waiting to meet Don Enzo, the man who controlled northern Italy. This required discretion, so a public place was chosen. As I entered, the waitress spoke to me in perfect English before I had even said a word. When I asked how she knew, she said Don Enzo's capo had described me to her. The meeting had already begun. She brought me a carafe of local red wine and asked if I wanted something to eat. I ordered a medium pizza with cheese and pepperoni, and she served it with utensils, as is custom in Italy. The place was filled with the smell of wood-fired pizza and a haze of cigar smoke. As I ate my second slice, they walked in. The restaurant fell silent. Everyone quickly found something else to focus on, and within moments, the place emptied out. 2 men entered first, scanning the restaurant. One checked the restrooms, the other, the kitchen. Then came the third man, tough and cold. His hand stayed in his coat, though it wasn't cold enough for one. I suspected he had a weapon. He stared straight at me, and I stared back, refusing to blink. The 2 men finished their check and nodded to the tough guy, who then opened the door and made a signal without breaking eye contact. I calmly continued eating my pizza. They weren't my enemies, but they weren't my friends either. One wrong move, and I'd be sleeping with the fishes. It was my first time meeting their boss, and it felt like a power struggle, both of us sizing each other up. If I showed any weakness, I might as well head back home, as no business would be done. A small man in his 60s entered, though I later learned he was in his 70s. Impeccably dressed and commanding respect without a word, his men seemed to stand at attention in his presence. He locked eyes with me, inspecting me carefully. I stood up slowly to avoid appearing threatening. One wrong move, and I could be in serious trouble. I gestured to the seat across from me and asked the waitress, "Please bring the Don a glass so we can share this wine and perhaps the pizza." The Don's stern look softened, and he smiled. "Of course, I'll join you, Mr. Pergolizzi," he said, though his eyes remained sharp. I wasn't surprised he knew my name, as our meeting was arranged. As we sat, the waitress treated him like royalty, almost as if she might kiss his ring. I wondered whether this devotion came from fear, respect, or loyalty. It was hard to tell, but it fascinated me. In New York, loyalty usually came from fear, intimidation, or money. There was no friendship, only family, and even that couldn't always be trusted. So I watched Don Enzo closely as he watched me. We shared pizza and wine, and he asked about my family, my Uncle Bruno in particular, who was the American version of him. They had met before, though I was surprised by how well-informed he was about my cousins, wife, and other relatives, none of whom he had met. He signaled the waitress to clear the table and bring coffee. Italian coffee, I warned, is strong, far stronger than anything from Starbucks. He added a ridiculous amount of sugar to his and took a sip, saying, "Buono." I tried mine and nearly choked. He suggested more sugar, but it didn't help. I kept coughing, and he laughed, pinching my cheek, saying, "We'll make an Italian out of you yet." He ordered cappuccino with extra cream for me, which was easier to drink, but still strong. As we sipped, I noticed we were now alone in the restaurant. "Shall we talk about your request now?" he said. And as he spoke, my thoughts drifted back to when this life of mine began. When I was about 14, my dad started taking me to work with him. He worked for my Uncle Bruno, building shopping centers. My dad handled turning empty lots into rough buildings, 4 walls, a roof, and the parking lot. My uncle had another foreman who took care of the interior finish work. Together, they made a lot of money. I began working as a mason's helper after school and during summer breaks. It was fun, and I made some pocket money. At first, I supplied one mason with bricks and mortar, but soon I was keeping up with 4. Over the summer, I traded my baby fat for muscle. Then I got introduced to cement blocks, which were much heavier. Carrying them was tough, and by the end of 2 weeks, my arms felt like they were dragging. But by my second year, I could keep up, and by the third, I was in great shape. supplying 4 masons while staying ahead of the game. During my 4th summer, things started going missing. Tools, stuff from cars and trucks. We couldn't figure out who was stealing. One day, while catching my breath on the scaffolding, I saw a shadow below, opening a toolbox. Without thinking, I pushed a stack of blocks and they fell onto the thief. He wasn't wearing a hard hat, and the impact was severe. The EMTs later said he didn't survive the fall. Some guys quickly pulled me down the other side of the scaffolding and told me to keep quiet. If anyone asked, I was supposed to say I was on the other side of the building. And that's how I liquidated my first man. There would be more in the years ahead. After that, my dad, uncle, and the crew treated me like a hero. I was blooded and became one of the men. Suddenly, I was hearing conversations about family business I had no idea existed. Aside from construction, we were into gambling, protection, smuggling, liquidation for hire, loan sharking, and more. The construction company, a few restaurants, and a strip club were just fronts to launder our money. My uncle Bruno had a son a couple of years older than me, and we grew up as best friends. I did the physical work, while he handled the brains of the operation, making us a great team. I started tagging along with the crews, learning how our other businesses worked. I especially enjoyed the weekly trips to the strip club. While the guys met with the manager, I got to sit up front and watch the dancers. The crew said the girls were skanks, but they were always nice to me, maybe because of my family connections or because I was a 20-year-old with money. One of my first real family jobs was collections. My first attempt, though, was a disaster. I was with Tony Snelling, chasing down a guy who was months behind on his payments. We found him at a redneck bar, but he had 4 friends with him. They jumped Tony, and I couldn't just watch, so I grabbed a chair and a pool cue to help. I got a few strikes in, but it quickly turned into 5 against 1. I was getting knocking badly when the bartender fired a rifle into the ceiling, scaring them off. Tony and I were bleeding on the floor when the bartender and some patrons helped us to the back room. A waitress started patching us up. Soon, my father and some of the crew arrived, furious. While Tony and I were loaded into an SUV, my dad made sure the bartender and waitress were well compensated. They also earned his respect and protection. I was sore for weeks, but Tony had it worse. Not only did he take a bigger knocking, but he was also on my father's bad side for letting me get hurt. He got stuck with the worst jobs for a while. As for the 5 guys who attacked us, they disappeared, and the loan was later written off. After that, I started spending more time with the capos and learning how the family businesses really worked. I wasn't seen as a low-level thug anymore. I was on my way to becoming a boss. My mother didn't want me getting hurt again, so I learned how to dress and act like a successful 25-year-old. I spent time with our lawyer and accountant learning the legal side of the business, which I found boring. I preferred hanging out with the guys and visiting the strip clubs, but my father and uncle made it clear that my future in the family business was set, whether I liked it or not. This was the turning point in my life. I stopped doing hands-on construction work and became the general foreman. My role was to ensure the job was completed to the client's satisfaction. We were building a multi-story office with street-level storefronts. The top 3 floors were for a big law firm expanding into our town from the East Coast. My job foreman constantly complained about the woman in charge from the law firm. She was demanding and made life difficult for everyone until she got what she wanted. One afternoon, I got a call. She had pushed the crew too far, and they all walked off the job. My foreman dropped the problem on me, but my dad was the one who told me to go handle it. I hopped into my GTO and sped across town, ready to deal with her. When I arrived, I met my foreman, but before I could say anything, a stunning woman about my age started tearing into me. "Who do you think you are? What makes you think you can do what these guys couldn't with your fancy clothes and car?" She kept ranting, but I just stood there, mesmerized by her beauty. When she finally paused, I asked her to dinner. That set her off again, though not for as long. "You still haven't answered my question about dinner," I said calmly. She looked at me, really seeing me for the first time, and after sizing me up, said, "Okay." It was almost 5 p.m., so I offered to take her to her hotel to change. I waited in the car for nearly an hour, getting more and more frustrated. But when she finally came out, I forgot my irritation. She looked stunning, her hair soft, eyes sparkling, and she smelled amazing. Originally, I planned to take her to a casual spot, but she looked so good that I decided to take her to Portofino's, the best restaurant in town, and one my family owned. "Would you mind if we go to Portofino's?" I asked. She said, "I'd love that, but isn't there a 30-40-day wait for reservations?" "With you looking this beautiful, I'm sure we can walk right in," I replied, using my usual charm. She gave me a curious look, then smiled wide at the compliment. I drove us to the restaurant, pulling up at the front. A valet opened her door, and I handed my keys to his partner. Another staff member opened the door for us, and the maitre d' led us straight to a table. No wait, no questions, just flawless service. She was clearly impressed. After we sat, I said, "I realize we haven't been formally introduced. I'm Luis Pergolizzi, General Manager at Monroe Builders. Please call me Lou." She smiled and replied, "Nice to meet you, Lou. I'm Sophia Jones, Office Manager at Nixon and Hargreaves Attorneys. I'm impressed with your restaurant choice." "Nothing but the best for a beautiful woman like you," I said. We had a great dinner and danced in the clubroom. I spotted my dad in the crowd later but waved him off. I knew I'd hear about that the next day. I was a gentleman all night, and when I took Sophia back to her hotel, I gave her a soft goodnight kiss. I didn't push for more because I wanted to see her again. A year later, I was standing at the altar, watching her walk toward me on her father's arm. It was a beautiful wedding with all my family and coworkers, and she invited her law firm friends, including the senior partners. The lawyers were standoffish with my family and construction crew, probably thinking they were better than us. Screw them. We had more money and power locally than they did. They didn't really know us, though. We kept a low profile, appearing as small-time businessmen. About 5 years into the marriage, I noticed changes in Sophia. She started acting like the stuck-up lawyers, dragging me to their parties and ignoring my friends and coworkers. She'd leave me at the table to dance with those phonies. They were polite to me, but never truly engaged. They'd listen when I talked, then continue their conversations as if I wasn't there. At one Christmas party, I noticed a particular attorney had my wife's full attention while I was completely ignored. It wasn't just a case of working with the backs, but keeping hands off their women. It was worse. I saw them kissing in a dark corner of the dance floor, his hands on her waist. I didn't feel very festive after that. I waited for the lawyer near the emergency stairwell and, when he passed, shoved him down the stairs. It happened fast, and no one saw. He was hospitalized for months, and doctors weren't optimistic about his recovery. When we got home, Sophia and I had a huge fight about her behavior. She never connected her friend's accident to me. That was the last office event I attended. After that, she went solo. Despite my threats, she had guts. My family noticed the growing tension. One day, my uncle approached me. "Lou, I see things aren't going well with Sophia. Divorce isn't desirable in our family. Does she know about our true business?" I shook my head. "No, she doesn't." He nodded. "If she embarrasses the family, I'll have to take action. It's a matter of family honor." I knew exactly what he meant. Both my marriage and Sophia would be over. For the next 6 years, we lived as roommates. I stayed in the guest room. She stayed in the master. I'd come home after work, change, and then leave until early morning, spending my nights at our family-friendly businesses. Sophia stopped waiting up or trying to talk to me. We barely existed as a couple. One night, I noticed she didn't come home. After a week, I realized she wasn't coming back. I got confirmation when an associate from her law firm barged into our strip club. That was his first mistake. "Hey, idiot, I'm here to serve you divorce papers. Your wife's throwing you out." That was his second mistake. Normally, I'm calm, but his attitude set me off. Before he could react, I attacked. By the time my guys pulled me off, he was dead. I'd knocking him to end of life. I don't believe in a 3-strike rule. They put me in an SUV and drove me to another restaurant we owned. I was quickly ushered inside and told to act like I'd been there all night. Important people there made a point to talk to me, giving me an alibi. A month later, when I didn't respond to the divorce petition and the junior lawyer hadn't returned, Sophia's law firm tried freezing my accounts. That might have worked, except the family owned the bank I used. The manager moved my money to a different account under a new name and backdated everything, making it look like I'd done this months earlier. Our lawyers went on the attack, freezing all of Sophia's accounts, credit cards, and even her 401k. Nothing could be traced back to us. The law firm filed maltreatment suits against me, but my lawyers blocked them. When one of our guys tried talking to a senior partner, the partner laughed and had him thrown out. Big mistake. That night, a small fire broke out in their file room. While the fire didn't cause much damage, the sprinklers and fire hoses destroyed everything on all 3 floors the firm occupied. They were out of business until repairs could be made. The family made a generous donation to the fire department. Later, the law firm's insurance wasn't in order, so they couldn't collect on their claim. By the time they recovered, Sophia and her lawyer boyfriend had vanished. My uncle took over the search. It took nearly a year, but the lovers were finally found living in Europe. That's why I was meeting with Don Enzo. His organization had located them. "What do you want done with the lovers?" Don Enzo asked calmly. Just lead me to them so I can get my revenge, I said, my voice full of anger. No, he replied. Your uncle and father don't want you involved. I need my satisfaction, I protested. Then he hit me with a question. All three of them. 3? I asked, confused. She's pregnant and we don't damage children, he said simply. I nearly broke down in frustration, but seeing my struggle, the Don offered a solution. We'll handle your revenge after the baby is born. The child will be placed with a loving family who are friends of ours. The father is unnecessary, so we'll deal with him quickly. As for your wife, we'll make an example of her after the baby arrives, he added with a chilling smile. Now I understood why people left when he entered the restaurant. Your wife is a strong-willed woman. It will be fun breaking her, he said, his eyes gleaming. He finished by telling me, your bags are packed, and a car is ready to take you to a private airport. You'll fly to Rome, then back home. We can't meet or speak again until this business is finished. Afterward, I'd like to see you again. With that, he dismissed me. I was surprised by how quickly things moved. I'd barely spent 10 hours in Italy, and now I was being rushed back home. Though a bit insulted by the abrupt dismissal, I kept quiet. I probably spent more time on planes than in Italy. Jet lag hit me hard, and I slept for a whole day, though maybe it was more relief from finally resolving my marriage problems. When I returned to work, my father pulled me aside. The Don called, he said. He said you're a good boy and they'll take care of your problem. But remember, you owe him a favor. Whatever he asks, you'll do it. It's family honor. I nodded, understanding the gravity of it. I went back to my usual work routine. About 6 months later, the divorce went through. Thanks to our connections, it was quick. The reason? Desertion. I got everything, and she got nothing. What else would you expect when we own the judge? Almost a year later, I found an envelope on the front seat of my locked car. The alarm was still on, and nothing was disturbed except for the envelope. These guys are good, I thought. I peeked inside and saw part of a newspaper, but decided to wait until I was somewhere private to read it. On my drive to the office, traffic was terrible. Slow drivers, distracted people, and student drivers, all making me anxious to see what was inside. Finally, at my desk, I pulled out 2 clippings from an Italian newspaper. Though I could speak Italian, reading it wasn't my strong suit. One article was circled, so I tried sounding out the words. It described a man's body washing ashore. He and his pregnant wife had disappeared after renting a sailboat for a day trip. The timeline matched, and it was clear the couple was Sophia and her boyfriend. I wondered, why was the baby liquidated? Since Don Enzo had always said, we don't do kids. But I shrugged it off. My problem was solved. I shredded the article, satisfied. I'd tell my dad in the morning and he'd be proud. That night, I felt like celebrating. About a year later, another envelope appeared on my car's front seat, despite it being locked and the alarm set. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to get it there. Just wait until I see that salesman again, I muttered. It felt like déjà vu as I drove to my office, wondering what was inside. This one was thicker, more like a pamphlet than a single sheet. I opened it and emptied the contents on my desk. It was an underground adult magazine. The cover showed an unclothed woman being brutally attacked, her face twisted in horror. The realism was unsettling. You could almost hear her scream. A yellow post-it marked a page. I turned to it and saw another woman, also attacked, her head shaved. Then I realized it was Sophia, my ex-wife. Her eyes weren't vacant like the others. They were filled with hatred directed at the camera. She was still fully aware of what was happening. I now understood Don Enzo's words, it will be fun breaking her. Sophia was tough and would suffer for a long time. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I kept the magazine to show my dad and Uncle Bruno. They would get a kick out of it. They had little respect for women who disrespected their men. 6 months later, my dad called. Bruno and I need to see you in the office now, he said, and hung up. When they called, you didn't ask questions. I knew I hadn't messed up, so I just hoped it wasn't about cleaning up someone else's mistake. In the conference room, my uncle spoke. Don Enzo wants to see you again. He's sending a plane next week. Plan on staying for 3 weeks. He's got people for you to meet, and a surprise. But I don't want to go, I complained, but they ignored me. Just be ready. We'll send a limo. Soon, I was on a private Gulfstream jet, the only passenger besides a stunning blonde flight attendant, about 25 to 28 years old. She was 5'4", curvy, and hard to ignore. I tried to keep my focus on her eyes. She smiled and said, "It's okay to look. Men have been staring since I was 15. I chuckled. "It's not polite to stare. You've got beautiful eyes, and your face isn't bad either." If you keep up the compliments, I might let you touch them, she teased. Call me Lou, I said. It's a long flight. We might as well get acquainted. I noticed a huge diamond ring on her finger. She's married, I thought. I took her hand and said, Too bad someone knocked me to you. We could have had fun. She gave me a sad smile and replied, It would have been nice. She guided me to my seat and went over the flight rules and amenities of the Gulf Stream. There were 2 rooms. Cabins, she politely corrected me. The front cabin was arranged like a living room with 2 couches, plush leather chairs, and a table with bench seating. The aft cabin featured a waterbed and a bathroom that nearly made me laugh. It was all marble and gold, complete with a bidet, bathtub, and separate shower. Antonetta Goya, the flight attendant, sat across from me and buckled in. As she crossed her legs, I saw almost everything. She just smiled, and I knew it was going to be a long flight. The pilot taxied onto the runway, revved the engines to full power, and released the brakes. We surged forward, hitting a few bumps along the way. I was about to scream when the wheels left the ground. Before I knew it, I had unbuckled my seatbelt, and Antonetta was sitting there, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. A woman likes knowing she's still got it, she said with a wink. The flight was great, filled with laughter and jokes for 6 hours. A couple of times the pilot or co-pilot came back to chat. By the time we landed in Milan, I knew I would never want to fly commercial again. The landing was so smooth, I didn't realize we had touched down until I heard the wheels screech. The pilot parked at an empty hangar and shut off the engines. A Bentley limo pulled up by the stairs and 3 men, button men from the old days at the trattoria, stepped out. That could only mean one thing. Don Enzo was in the limo. I walked down the stairs, watching as the co-pilot unloaded my luggage. Before I could grab my bags, one of the button men and the driver had already taken care of them. When I got into the car, Don Enzo greeted me with a smile. Welcome back to Italy. My son, Don Enzo. I'm honored by all of this, but I'm just a glorified bricklayer, not some prince deserving of such treatment, I said, trying to downplay it. He smiled again. Your parents would be proud to hear you say that. But for now, it's getting late. We'll drive to my home and have dinner. And drive we did. The limo driver whipped through traffic like Mario Andretti while Don Enzo poured me a glass of wine. I did my best not to spill it as we sped along. When we finally reached the autostrada, I thought the wild ride was over, but I glanced at the speedometer, 240 kilometers per h. We were racing down the road at 150 miles per hour. I must have looked panicked because Don Enzo patted my knee. Don't worry, he said. Guido is one of the best drivers around. It took an hour to reach Don Enzo's house, a trip that normally takes 2.5 to 3 hours. His estate was surrounded by a wall with a gate guarded by 2 armed men who nearly saluted as we passed. Looking across the vast lawn, I saw more armed guards patrolling the grounds. We can't be too careful, Don Enzo said. There are always envious men trying to take what's mine. From now on and whenever you visit, you'll have men protecting you wherever you go. Don Enzo, I can take care of myself, I protested. I'm not a kid anymore. I was blooded before I even finished high school. This isn't a request. It's an order, he said firmly, and the look in his eyes left no room for argument. Later that evening, as I wandered the mansion, I ran into an old acquaintance, the bodyguard I once nicknamed Hart. He introduced himself properly this time. My name is Nunzo, he said. You were brave to tell the Don no earlier, but don't ever do it again. One look from him, and I would have had to eliminate you. He doesn't like being told no. Understand? Yes, I replied quickly, realizing how close I had come to crossing a line. That night's dinner was a feast fit for a king, though I suppose the Don was a king in his own way. It was just the 2 of us in a dining room that could seat 30. He sat at the head and I was beside him. We made small talk and he asked about my family, Uncle Bruno, and his family. I learned that he was 75 years old and had been a widower for 15 years. His wife had died of bosom cancer and he was still grieving. He had 2 sons and 1 granddaughter who was the light of his life. The sons, well, I gathered they had disappointed him. We finished dinner and moved to his study for cognac and cigars. The cigars weren't the small Italian-style ones, but top-of-the-line Cubans. I savored mine and the drink, thinking I could get used to this life. Private jets, limos, country estates, mansions, fine cigars. Yeah, I could get used to this lifestyle. The only downside was that people wanted him dead. That put a damper on my daydream. We were both tired. He because of his age, me because of jet lag and trying to keep my eyes in check. His butler showed me to my room. The last thing he said before leaving was, Breakfast is at 9 a.m. I will lay out your clothes in the morning. I'll wake you at 7 o'clock. This was not how I grew up. Back then, Mom would yell up the stairs for me to get up, and if I took too long, Dad would come pull me out of bed, not so gently. My bedroom here was a luxury suite, complete with its own bathroom, sitting room, dressing room, and bedroom. The Don spared no expense for his home or his guests. The next day, my rounds began. Me, the Don, and 4 bodyguards toured the stable, bocce ball court, pool, and tennis courts. This guy had all the toys. The following day, we checked out his car collection, his weapon collection, and then drove to his winery in one of his 2-seat Ferraris. We spoke with the winemaker and sampled some of his latest blends. By the time we were ready to go, we had to call for a ride because neither of us was in any condition to drive. The next day was a visit to the cheesemaker, and the day after that, we visited the prosciutto operation. After those 3 days of indulgence, I realized I needed to find a gym. I was eating like a pig. On one of the rides back, I brought up the topic of Sophia, my ex. He explained, we had planned to wait until after her baby was born before taking action, but I got tipped off that they were planning to run. The lovers knew they were being hunted, and their hunters were close. My men followed them, and when they sailed out of Venice, my guys were right behind. He went on. They boarded the sailboat, grabbed Sophia and her boyfriend, then sank the boat and took the 2 of them to a special building where they were held until Sophia gave birth. The boyfriend was taken care of in front of her while she was restrained and unable to intervene. It was a drawn-out ordeal over the course of 2 days. She showed no compassion for him at all. She was a total witch. Then it was Sophia's turn. He paused and continued. They misused her for months, but she wouldn't break, so they sold her. I received some photos in an underground magazine showing what had been done to her, but she still didn't break. The last I heard, she was alive and being passed around. The baby is now 2.5 and living with a loving family. For some reason, I was glad the kid was okay. Sophia? I couldn't care less, I responded. The Don wanted to show me his summer villa on the Italian Riviera and introduce me to his granddaughter. She loved the water and spent all her free time there. I wasn't eager to meet her, though, knowing what the Don and his sons looked like. None of them could be described as attractive. I figured she probably inherited the same genes and felt bad for her. We arrived at the villa and were greeted by the cook. Everyone else was either in town, at the beach, or out sailing. His granddaughter wouldn't be back until the next evening. I expected the Don to lose it, but he just looked sad. All he said was "Grazia" when informed of her absence. He showed me around the villa and the village, but his heart wasn't in it. He just wanted to see his granddaughter. 2 days later, we were sipping wine on the patio before dinner when we heard a commotion inside the house. The Don managed to say, "My bambina," before she burst through the glass doors and onto the patio. This whirlwind ran past me and hugged the Don in a bear hug. As I turned toward them, I recognized her voice immediately. I'd spent 5 hours listening to that beautiful voice on the airplane. With a hoarse voice, I said, "Antonietta?" She heard my voice and turned. When I saw her face, there was that same wonderful grin. She threw her arms around me and gave me a kiss I never wanted to end. But the Don had other plans. "At least, let me introduce you two before you start making babies," he said, grinning, which cracked us both up. Antonietta explained how we met. "Ingrid couldn't make the flight you sent, so I volunteered to play flight attendant. Don and I had a wonderful flight getting to know each other, Poppy. He's a good man, a real keeper." We chatted for a while until dinner was ready. Well, she mostly talked to the Don, and I just listened. She was a woman, after all. "So, where's the lucky guy?" "Who's your husband?" I asked. The Don had a funny look on his face, and Antonietta just started laughing again. She told her grandfather, "I lied to him. I had my rings on, and he assumed I was married, so I told him I was. Poppy, he was a perfect gentleman. The whole flight, he even kept his eyes where they should be." We went inside and had dinner. The grandfather and granddaughter had fun teasing me throughout the meal. I've got broad shoulders, I can handle it. No, really, we had a great time. After dinner, we were enjoying drinks on the patio when the maid came out to tell Antonietta she had a phone call. As she left to take it, all sorts of awful thoughts crossed my mind. Who was calling her? A boyfriend? Girlfriend? Lover? The Don tried to calm me, sort of. "It's probably her daughter, Danny," he said casually. "Oh," I muttered, trying to take it in. About that time, Antonietta walked back out and said, "Danny says hi and she misses us." Then turning to me, she added, I can't wait for you to meet her. You'll love her immediately. That's why I wear these rings. If I didn't, people would get the wrong idea about me having a little girl." I just stood there with a dumb look on my face. "No, you silly guy," she laughed. "Danny's adopted. She's in Milan with friends right now. You'll meet her in a couple of days." The next day, Antonietta and I went sailing. She wore a tiny one-piece swimsuit that perfectly showcased her incredible body. You guessed it, I got excited. She was a stunning Italian beauty with a figure that could drive any man wild. I had seen her in clothes before, both on the plane and at the Don's villa, and while her outfits were fantastic, nothing compared to that swimsuit. Even though it was a one-piece, there was more fabric in a typical bikini than in hers. It was just the two of us on the single-masted sloop. My job was to handle the helm and pray as hard as I could. There was no automatic pilot, so I had to keep both hands on the wheel instead of where I wanted them. Damn. At some point in the afternoon, I heard her mention tan lines. Next thing I knew, she was lying on the front deck and her swimsuit had disappeared. After a while, she came over and started applying sunblock to me. Once I was covered, she took the helm, and I got to return the favor, rubbing sunblock over her perfect body. I took my time, paying special attention to all the right spots. When I finished, her knees went weak, and I had to wrap my arms around her to keep her upright while also grabbing the helm. When she regained her composure, she turned in my arms and kissed me long and deep. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed that. Every man is scared of me because of my grandfather. Thank you for being brave." "My pleasure," was all I could think to say. She slipped out of my arms and stood behind me, wrapping hers around my waist. Her lips kept kissing my neck and shoulders. "You've got a lot to offer a girl," she whispered in my ear. I smiled to myself. "I hope you know how to handle your grandfather," I thought. I didn't want to make him angry. The rest of the week flew by, and suddenly it was time for the Don and me to return to his home in Vicenza. Antonietta grew very quiet those last 2 days. I was already missing her, even though I hadn't left yet. We took long walks around the villa, not really talking about anything, just holding hands like teenagers. On the morning the Don and I were set to leave, Antonietta showed up to say goodbye. She was with a little girl, around 3 years old, with long black hair and the prettiest blue eyes. She held Antonietta's hand as they walked across the yard. When she saw the Don, she smiled wide and called out, "Poppy!" She let go of Antonietta's hand and ran to him with her little arms outstretched, waiting to be picked up. I watched the old man soften as she babbled away in her sweet Italian. "Lou, this is Gina, my favorite little great-granddaughter," he said. "Would you like to meet her?" He brought her over to me. Gina became shy and hid her face in his neck. "Gina, this is Mr. Pergolizzi from America. He's a friend of your mother's." The little girl peeked at me, giving a small smile before hiding her face again. I took a chance and spoke in simple Italian. "Ciao, Bella. I'm happy to meet you." A soft little voice replied, "Ciao, signore." It was sweet and quiet. As the family and I said our goodbyes, Gina kept stealing glances at me from her grandfather's shoulder. Each time I caught her, I smiled and winked, which made her giggle and turn away. Antonietta said, "I think you've made a new friend." When it was time to leave, there were hugs and kisses all around. Gina was back in Antonietta's arms when I heard her whispering something. Antonietta smiled and said, "Someone wants a kiss from you." I turned to see Gina reaching out to me. I walked over, and she wrapped her little arms around my neck while Antonietta held her. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before hiding in Antonietta's neck again. But this time, there was a little smile peeking out as she looked at me. The Don and I spent most of the 4-hour drive back to his compound in silence. I didn't know what he was thinking, but my mind was on the 2 females I had left behind at the villa. One thing was certain. I wasn't done with them. The flight home was long and usually lonely, but even with Inga's beauty sitting next to me, I couldn't stop thinking about the 2 females I had left behind in Italy. I settled back into my routine at home, but time flew by. I found ways to relieve my stress, but for some reason, I kept imagining it was Antonietta, or maybe just wishing it was her. Either way, the relief wasn't as satisfying as I wanted. 2 months later, I found another envelope on my car seat. This time, I knew it was from Don Enzo. His delivery method was unmistakable. I headed toward my office, where my father and Uncle Bruno were already in. They gave me curious looks as I walked by. "A message from Italy," was all I said. Once in my office, I opened the envelope and shook out its contents. A single handwritten page slipped out, and I started reading the shaky handwriting. "My dear, I want to thank you for your visit. It was truly nice getting to know you. I feel as if I have another son, one who respects his father, unlike my own two. Anyway, I'm writing because I have two very unhappy girls here. A little one who keeps asking where her daddy is, and an older one who spends all her time staring into space. It seems you've made quite the impression on them. If you have the time and a little compassion, here is Antonietta's phone number. I'd love to see them smile again. Best wishes, Enzo. I immediately dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. The phone rang, and just as I expected to get voicemail, a sleepy voice answered. Pronto? I had completely forgotten about the time difference. Ciao, Antonietta, it's me, Lou. She almost burst my eardrums with her scream. Carl! I heard some noise and confusion in the background before she continued. No, I'm fine, it's my Louis, she told whoever was near. I suddenly realized I'd gone from friend to darling Carl, and finally to my Louis. I felt my chest swell as I listened to her voice. We talked until her cell phone battery started dying. Before we hung up, we arranged another call for a specific day and time. As we were about to disconnect, I swear I heard her whisper, Ti amo, my Louis. But I couldn't be certain. For the next 3 days, I walked around with a goofy grin on my face. It probably would have lasted longer if not for an early phone call on the 4th day. At 8 a.m., Cheryl, the office receptionist, informed me of the call. I was in the conference room with my father and Uncle Bruno, getting my orders for the day. I tried to wave her off, but she insisted. My father gave me an annoyed look as I picked up the phone. Hello, Lou Pergolizzi speaking. At first, I heard nothing but a faint voice saying, Okay, Gina, say hello. Then, that shy voice I missed said, Pronto, mio padre. I instantly knew it was Antonietta's daughter, Gina. Buongiorno, Bella, ti amo, I replied, my heart melting. I heard her little giggle over the phone, and then Antonietta came on. Gina is running off to tell her grandfather she spoke to you. You've made her a very happy little girl. She talks about you all the time now. I love her too. She's as charming as her mother, I said. We kept chatting, and for a moment I forgot all about my father and uncle sitting there. That was until I noticed the large speakerphone was broadcasting our conversation. My dad broke the silence. Aren't you going to introduce us? He said loud enough for Antonietta to hear. She caught on right away and said, Well, aren't you going to introduce me? I quickly put the handset down and made the introductions over the speakerphone. Once I had, my father chimed in again. I'm happy to finally meet the woman who has my son walking around with his head in the clouds. When will we have the pleasure of meeting you and your lovely daughter? Antonietta laughed softly. I'll ask my grandfather about a visit. His business keeps him very busy, and I don't know if he can travel across the ocean. We'd love to return the hospitality Don Enzo has shown our son. Surely one of your brothers could take care of things while he visits, my father suggested. Please remind him we'd love to honor him for all he's done for our son. With that, our morning meeting took priority, so Antonietta and I said our goodbyes. Afterward, I got some good-natured teasing from my family. Later, Cheryl cornered me, demanding details. But I just smiled, which only made her more determined to find out. It took another week before I could call Italy again. The 8-hour time difference was a bit tricky, but we managed to make it work. And talk we did. Antonietta would hang up and dream of me while I walked around thinking about her. I also loved calling early enough to talk to Gina. She was eager to practice her English, telling me all about her life in a mix of baby English and Italian. Antonietta would listen on the speakerphone, laughing at our little conversations. As Christmas approached, we started making gift lists for our families. Gina was going to be spoiled. I joked to Antonietta, I'd better rent a shipping container just for her presents. I could hear her smile through the phone. Don't waste your money, she said. There are plans in the works. That could only mean one thing. They were coming for Christmas. Thanksgiving was approaching, and we were having our traditional family gathering at one of the family-owned restaurants. We invited all the relatives and most of our employees. It was our tradition. We closed the restaurant and threw a big party. There was always too much food and drink, and I made sure to indulge. I was sitting at the head table, half listening to my uncle give the usual welcome speech, when I heard something that snapped me to full attention. I'd like to welcome Enzo Castillo and his family to our feast. I blinked in surprise. That was Don Enzo and his family. My heart skipped a beat as I looked toward the entrance. Sure enough, my dad and uncle were escorting Don Enzo and his family into the dining room, but I wasn't focused on him. I was searching for two people, Antonietta and Gina, and there they were. Little Gina saw me standing at the far end of the room and immediately started pulling Antonietta toward me. She broke free of her mother's hand when they were close and ran around the end of the table, heading straight for me as fast as her little legs could go. When she reached me, she leaped into my arms and wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. "Hi, Daddy!" she proudly exclaimed in her broken English. The whole room erupted in applause. I was speechless, but my heart swelled. When Antonietta reached us, I found myself holding the two most beautiful girls in the room. I couldn't help but get a little excited looking at Antonietta, but thankfully my loose dress slacks and jacket helped conceal my reaction. Antonietta gave me a knowing smile as she hugged me. We enjoyed a wonderful meal. Gina sat on my lap trying to feed me, but more food ended up on my clothes than in my mouth. The dry cleaner would definitely have a job ahead. My dad and Uncle Bruno spent the evening introducing Don Enzo to family members and friends. Later, Enzo told me he was impressed that they could remember not only everyone's names, but also details about their families. The evening flew by, and soon I had a little girl fast asleep on my lap, and a beautiful woman at my side. I leaned over to Antonietta and asked, "Where are you staying?" She smiled. "Dad is staying at your uncle's with his crew. Gina and I are staying at your apartment. There's no room left at your uncle's. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," I replied. "But where will you sleep?" Antonietta grinned mischievously. "Your dad thinks Gina and I will share a bed, but I don't think so." Gina snores. "I hope you don't." That smile was enough to drive me crazy. We used Gina's sleepiness as an excuse to leave early. When we got to my apartment, I carried Gina to the guest bedroom and left her with her mom. I noticed the small pink luggage, clearly indicating this plan was made in advance. Then I went to my room to change out of my food-stained clothes, only to find a larger set of luggage there, Antonietta's. I undressed in the bathroom and got into the shower, trying to clean up from Gina's messy attempt at dinner. I had just lathered up when I felt the shower door open, and someone joined me. Hands started rubbing soap on my back, then moved to my front. We both had a great time in the shower, laughing and teasing each other. Afterward, I picked her up, turned off the water, and carried her to my bed. We made love for the next 2 hours and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. We made love again in the morning, a sweet, gentle way to wake up. We were still lying there, holding each other, when we heard Gina calling for her mommy. She'd woken up in an unfamiliar room, confused. I dove under the covers while Antonietta threw on a cotton nightgown and rushed to comfort her. A few moments later, mother and daughter came into the bedroom. Gina looked up at us and asked sweetly, "Can I sleep with you and Mommy, please?" So there we were, 4 of us in bed. Me, Antonietta, Gina, and a fuzzy little stuffed animal named Peppino. As I lay there watching them, I realized something important. I wanted this. I wanted a family. My days of playing the field were over. Now I just had to convince Antonietta and her father. Gina, it seemed, was already on my side. As Antonietta and Gina slept beside me, I started making plans. Convincing Don Enzo wouldn't be the hard part. He liked me, and had made it clear he was disappointed in his sons. He saw me as a better fit for the family, even though I wasn't related by blood. He'd welcome me without hesitation. Antonietta, however, was the real challenge. She wouldn't commit. She was happy with things as they were. She and Gina could live with me, but she didn't feel the need to formalize it with marriage. Both our families tried to convince her, but she was stubborn. I could sense something deeper was bothering her, something she hadn't shared. It all came to a head the week before they were supposed to return to Italy. I was sitting on the balcony with Gina when Antonietta came out, holding some papers. Her expression was serious, and I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "Lou, we need to talk," she said firmly. I tried to make a joke, but she shut me down. "I'm serious. We need to talk." She held up the papers, and all I could do was nod. "Louis, I know you were married before," she started. "Your wife and her lover disappeared to Europe. My dad showed me a newspaper article saying they died in a boating accident, and she was pregnant." "That's right," I answered cautiously, unsure where this was going. She continued, "I know what my grandfather does for a living. While I don't condone that lifestyle, I know my family has been in this business for generations." She paused before adding, "What I want to know is, did you or my grandfather have anything to do with their end of lives, especially the unborn baby?" Her voice trembled, and I suddenly understood what had been weighing on her. She wasn't worried about Sophia or the lover, but the baby. "Honey, please, let me explain everything," I said. I told her the whole story about Sophia, up to my meeting with her grandfather at the trattoria. I explained that Don Enzo had promised not to act until after the baby was born and had made sure the child found a good home. Just then, my dad and Don Enzo appeared on the balcony. I hadn't known they were visiting, but apparently they had their own plans for this conversation. "Basta, stop," Don Enzo said, raising his hand. "I'll finish." He turned to Antonietta. "Carmia, Lou told you the truth as he knows it, but there are things he doesn't know." Antonietta looked confused but nodded. Enzo continued. "First, I told Lou that his wife and her lover disappeared in a boating accident, that we found the lover's body, but not hers. That was a lie. We captured their boat. The lover was dealt with, but Sophia and the unborn child were kept under lock and key until the baby was born. Then we sold the mother." I listened, recognizing the little lies scattered in his story. This was how the Don worked. Antonietta's voice trembled. "And the baby, Poppy?" "I gave the baby to a good family," Enzo said softly. "A family I trusted to raise her well." Antonietta's eyes widened. "She's sitting on your lap, isn't she, Poppy?" Enzo nodded slowly. "Yes, Gina is Sophia's daughter," Antonietta gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God, Gina!" Turning to me, Don Enzo asked, "Louis, do you have a problem raising that child?" I looked at him, my heart heavy but certain. "No, Papa, I don't." "And you, my granddaughter," he said, turning to Antonietta. "Do you have a problem raising this child now that you know the truth?" Antonietta almost collapsed into her chair, but managed to say, "No, Papa, I love her as if she were my own." "Then why won't you accept Louis's proposal?" he asked. Antonietta looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I promise I will accept the very next time he asks me," she whispered. I didn't waste a second. Right then and there, I dropped to one knee and asked her to marry me again.